The late afternoon sun streamed through the living room window, painting stripes of gold across the worn carpet. Grandpa Joe settled into his favorite armchair, a haven of soft cushions and familiar smells. His 3 grandkids, Lily, 8, Tom, 10, and Maya, 12, clustered around him, their eyes bright with anticipation. All right, Grandpa Joe chuckled, his voice raspy but warm. So you want to hear about the olden days, huh? The 1990s. Get ready, because it was a wild ride. He winked, a mischievous glint in his eye. You kids are all glued to your tablets and phones, but back then, things were different. Imagine a world without instant messaging or TikTok dances. Shocking, I know. Lily giggled. Did you have dinosaurs, Grandpa? Grandpa Joe feigned offense. Dinosaurs? I'm old, but not that old. The 90s were only, well, a few years ago, it feels like, he said with a smile. But seriously, it was a time of big changes. Technology was just starting to boom, and we were all trying to figure it out. It was exciting, confusing, and sometimes really funny. Tom, always the practical one, piped up. But how did you even talk to people if you didn't have phones? Ah, that's a great question, Tom. Grandpa Joe exclaimed, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. Well, for starters, we had landlines. Big, clunky phones that were attached to the wall with a cord. Can you imagine being stuck in one place while you talked? He paused for effect. And if you weren't home, well, people just couldn't reach you. Unless, he trailed off, a mysterious smile spreading across his face. Unless you had a pager. Maya, the eldest, looked intrigued. A pager? What's that? A pager, Grandpa Joe began, his eyes twinkling, was like a little electronic beeper. Someone would call a number, type in a message, and your pager would beep to let you know to call them back. It was the height of cool, for a little while, anyway. He chuckled again, a sound full of fond memories. Let me tell you about the first time I got a pager. But before pagers, Grandpa Joe continued, leaning forward conspiratorially, there was something even more amazing. Something that allowed you to take your music anywhere. Lily, Tom, and Maya exchanged curious glances. What was it? Maya asked, her voice filled with anticipation. The Walkman. Grandpa Joe announced triumphantly, as if revealing a long-held secret. Imagine, he said, his eyes gleaming, a small, portable cassette player with headphones. You could listen to your favorite music while you walked to school, rode your bike, or even just hung out in your room. It was revolutionary. He gestured dramatically, painting a picture with his words. Before the Walkman, if you wanted to listen to music, you had to be near a record player or a big boombox. But the Walkman changed everything. It was like having your own personal concert wherever you went. Tom frowned slightly. What's a cassette? Grandpa Joe chuckled. Ah, right. You kids wouldn't know. A cassette was a small plastic tape that held music. You had to rewind it and fast-forward it to get to the song you wanted. It wasn't as easy as just tapping a button on your phone, but it was part of the fun. He went on to describe the joy of getting a new cassette. The excitement of tearing off the plastic wrap, carefully inserting it into the Walkman, and pressing play. He talked about the slightly muffled sound quality and the occasional moments when the tape would get tangled. And the best part, Grandpa Joe said with a grin, was making mixtapes. Lily looked puzzled. Mixtapes? Yeah, Grandpa Joe explained. You would record your favorite songs from different cassettes onto one blank tape. You could make a mixtape for yourself, for your friends, or even for someone you liked. It was a way of sharing your musical taste and showing someone you cared. He paused, a wistful look on his face. I made a lot of mixtapes back in the day. Oh, those mixtapes, Grandpa Joe sighed, a faraway look in his eyes. They were serious business. You had to pick the right songs, the right order, it was like telling a story with music. He chuckled. I remember one time, I made a mixtape for a girl I had a crush on. Her name was Sarah. I spent weeks perfecting it. I even designed a special cover for the cassette case with her name written in bubble letters. Lily giggled. Bubble letters? That's so cute. Cute, maybe, Grandpa Joe said with a wry smile. But disastrous. I thought I was being so smooth, so romantic. I carefully chose songs that expressed my feelings, songs about love and longing. I even included a few of her favorite songs. He paused, building suspense. The problem was, I accidentally recorded over the last few songs with some, well, let's just say some very different music. My older brother had left a cassette in the player, and I didn't realize it was still there when I started recording. Tom's eyes widened. What kind of music? Grandpa Joe winced. Let's just say it wasn't exactly love songs. It was, loud. And angry. And definitely not something you'd want to play for a girl you were trying to impress. Maya burst out laughing. Oh no, Grandpa. What happened? Well, Grandpa Joe said sheepishly, Sarah listened to the mixtape, and she was really confused. She liked the first few songs, but then. Bam! Suddenly, it was like a completely different person had made the tape. She didn't know what to think. She actually thought I was playing a joke on her. He shook his head, still amused by the memory. It wasn't my finest moment. It took me a while to explain what had happened and convince her that I hadn't done it on purpose. Luckily, she had a good sense of humor, and we eventually laughed it off. But it taught me a valuable lesson, always double-check what you're recording. He winked at his grandkids. So, that's the story of my mixtape disaster. A cautionary tale for any aspiring romantic. Speaking of communication, Grandpa Joe said, smoothly transitioning, let me tell you about a world without cell phones. Can you even imagine that? The grandkids looked at each other, a mixture of disbelief and horror on their faces. No cell phones? Lily squeaked. How did you do anything? Well, Grandpa Joe chuckled, we survived. Somehow. It was a different kind of life, that's for sure. If you wanted to talk to someone, you had to call their house. And if they weren't home, you were out of luck. No texting, no calling their cell phone, no leaving a voicemail. You just had to wait and try again later. He leaned back in his chair, a reminiscent smile on his face. I remember trying to plan a surprise birthday party for my friend, Mark. It was like a secret mission. We had to coordinate everything using landlines, and it was a total nightmare. One time, I called his house, and his mom answered. I panicked and hung up without saying anything. She must have thought I was crazy. Tom frowned. So, what if there was an emergency? That was the tricky part, Grandpa Joe admitted. If there was a real emergency, you had to find a payphone. Remember those? Big, metal booths on the side of the road. You had to have change to make a call, and sometimes they didn't even work. He shook his head. It was definitely less convenient than having a cell phone in your pocket. But it also meant that people were more present in the moment. You weren't constantly checking your phone for messages or emails. You actually had to talk to people face to face. Maya considered this thoughtfully. So, you had to actually, plan things. Exactly. Grandpa Joe exclaimed. You couldn't just text someone at the last minute and say, hey, let's meet up in 5 minutes. You had to make arrangements in advance. It required a little more effort, but it also made things feel more special. And if someone said they were going to be somewhere at a certain time, you could usually count on it. People were more reliable back then, I think. He paused, considering. Or maybe I'm just getting old and grumpy. He chuckled, dispelling the moment of seriousness. But no, it was different. It had a certain charm. It forced you to be a little more resourceful, a little more patient, and a little more connected to the people around you. But, Grandpa Joe continued, a mischievous glint returning to his eye, there was a brief period, a glorious window of time, where we had something, almost as good as a cell phone. Something called a pager. He paused for dramatic effect, allowing his grandkids to lean in with anticipation. A pager, my dears, was like a tiny, rectangular box that you clipped to your belt. When someone wanted to reach you, they would call a special number, and your pager would beep. It would display a phone number, and you'd have to find a payphone to call them back. Lily wrinkled her nose. That sounds like a lot of work. It was, Grandpa Joe admitted. But it was also incredibly exciting. Having a pager meant you were important. You were someone who needed to be reached, someone who was in demand. He chuckled. I remember when I finally got my first pager. I felt like a hotshot businessman, even though I was just working at the local video store. Tom raised an eyebrow. What did you use it for? Mostly for work, Grandpa Joe explained. My boss would page me if he needed me to come in early or stay late. But sometimes, my friends would page me just to mess with me. They'd send me random numbers or silly messages. He launched into a story. One time, I was on a date with a girl named Jessica. We were at the movies, and my pager went off. I excused myself, found a payphone, and called the number. It was one of my friends, pretending to be a talent scout. He told me that I had been discovered and that I needed to come to Hollywood immediately for a screen test. Maya giggled. Did you believe him? For a split second, I did. Grandpa Joe admitted with a laugh. But then I recognized his voice. Jessica was not amused. She thought I was being rude and inconsiderate. It took me a while to convince her that it was just a prank. He shook his head. Pagers. They were a blessing and a curse. He paused, reflecting. They gave you a taste of constant communication, but they also came with a lot of limitations and opportunities for mischief. But the real game changer, Grandpa Joe declared, leaning forward with a twinkle in his eye, was the internet. That's when things really started to get interesting. The grandkids perked up. Even though they had only ever known a world with the internet, they were still curious to hear about its humble beginnings. Imagine, Grandpa Joe began, a world where you couldn't just Google anything you wanted to know. If you had a question, you had to go to the library and look it up in a book. Crazy, right? Lily giggled. That sounds like so much work. It was, Grandpa Joe agreed. But then, the internet came along, and suddenly, all the information in the world was at our fingertips, well, almost. It wasn't as fast or as easy as it is today. We had to use something called dial-up. He paused, waiting for the confused looks. Dial-up? Tom asked, tilting his head. Yeah, Grandpa Joe said with a grin. It was a way of connecting to the internet using your phone line. You'd plug your computer into the phone jack, and then you'd hear this sound. He proceeded to imitate the screeching, beeping, and hissing noises of a dial-up modem connecting to the internet. The grandkids burst out laughing. What is that? Maya exclaimed. That, Grandpa Joe said proudly, is the sound of progress. It took a few minutes to connect, and you couldn't use the phone while you were online. So, if someone tried to call you, they'd get a busy signal. He continued, and the websites. Oh, they were something else. Lots of blinking text, terrible graphics, and everything took forever to load. But it was amazing. We could send emails, chat with people from all over the world, and even look at pictures of cats. It was like magic. He remembered the first time he saw a website. It was a simple page with black text on a white background, but it felt like stepping into the future. He spent hours exploring the internet, clicking on every link he could find. It was a whole new world of information and possibilities. The world was opening up. It was slow, clunky, and sometimes frustrating, Grandpa Joe admitted, but it was also incredibly exciting. We knew that the internet was going to change everything, and we were right. Of course, it wasn't just technology that defined the 90s, Grandpa Joe said, changing gears. We also had some pretty amazing TV shows. The grandkids nodded eagerly. They loved hearing about the shows that Grandpa Joe used to watch. Back then, Grandpa Joe explained, TV was a shared experience. Families would gather around the television set at the same time to watch their favorite shows. There was no binge watching on demand. You had to wait a whole week for the next episode. Lily gasped dramatically. A whole week? I know, right? Grandpa Joe chuckled. It was torture. But it also made it more exciting. You'd spend the whole week talking about the show with your friends, speculating about what was going to happen next. He began listing some of his favorite shows from the 90s. The Simpsons was huge. Everyone watched The Simpsons. It was funny, smart, and a little bit subversive. And then there was Friends. That was the show that everyone was obsessed with. We all wanted to live in a big apartment in New York City with our best friends. Tom chimed in. Did you watch Full House? Grandpa Joe grinned. Of course. Full House was a classic. It was cheesy, but it was also heartwarming. And who could resist Uncle Jesse? He described the feeling of anticipation as the theme song started playing, the excitement of seeing your favorite characters on screen, and the disappointment when the episode ended. He talked about the water cooler conversations at school and work, where people would dissect every scene and debate the merits of each character. We didn't have hundreds of channels to choose from, Grandpa Joe said. We had a few main networks, and that was it. But that meant that everyone was watching the same shows, and we all had something to talk about. It created a sense of community. Even if you didn't know someone, you could always strike up a conversation about last night's episode of Seinfeld. He smiled wistfully. It was a simpler time, in some ways. We didn't have as many choices, but we appreciated what we had. But let's not forget about the fashion, Grandpa Joe said with a chuckle, a mischievous twinkle in his eye. Oh, the fashion of the 90s. It was, well, it was something. The grandkids exchanged curious glances, sensing a humorous story coming. You kids today have your own styles, and that's great, Grandpa Joe began, but the 90s, we were still figuring things out. We were experimenting. And sometimes, we failed spectacularly. He paused, letting the anticipation build. Neon colors were huge. Everything was bright, loud, and impossible to miss. We wore neon pink shirts with neon green shorts. It was a crime against fashion, but we thought we looked amazing. Lily giggled. Neon pink and green. Really? Really? Grandpa Joe confirmed with a laugh. And baggy clothes. Everything was oversized. We wore jeans that were 3 sizes too big, and shirts that hung down to our knees. We looked like we were swimming in our clothes. Tom frowned. Why? I don't know why. Grandpa Joe exclaimed, throwing his hands up in mock exasperation. It was just the style. Everyone was doing it. And the hairstyles. Don't even get me started on the hairstyles. We had frosted tips, bowl cuts, and the Rachel haircut. It was a mess. He rummaged through his wallet and pulled out an old, faded photograph. Here, he said, handing it to Maya. Take a look at this. This is me and your grandma at a school dance in 1995. Maya, Lily, and Tom crowded around the photo, their eyes widening in disbelief. Oh my gosh, Grandpa! Maya exclaimed, bursting out laughing. What are you wearing? In the photo, a younger Grandpa Joe was sporting a bright blue, oversized blazer with acid-wash jeans and a white t-shirt. His hair was styled in a questionable attempt at frosted tips. Grandma, equally fashionable, or unfashionable, was wearing a floral dress with shoulder pads and a scrunchie in her hair. See? Grandpa Joe said with a grin. I told you it was bad. But hey, we thought we looked good at the time. And that's all that matters, right? He smiled fondly. The 90s fashion might have been a little questionable, but it was ours. And we rocked it. Or at least, we tried to. Alright, enough about fashion disasters, Grandpa Joe said, clapping his hands together. Let's talk about something a little more serious, my first job. The grandkids leaned in, intrigued. They had heard bits and pieces about Grandpa Joe's early working life, but they had never gotten the full story. I was 16 years old, Grandpa Joe began, and I needed money. I wanted to buy a new CD player, and those things weren't cheap. So, I started looking for a job. After weeks of searching, I finally landed a gig at the local grocery store, bagging groceries. He paused, a nostalgic smile on his face. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a job. And it taught me a lot about responsibility and hard work. My first day was a disaster. I was so nervous, I kept dropping things. I accidentally crushed a loaf of bread, and I almost dropped a carton of eggs. The customers were not impressed. Lily giggled. Oh, Grandpa. It's true. Grandpa Joe insisted. But I learned quickly. I learned how to pack groceries efficiently, how to handle different types of items, and how to deal with grumpy customers. I also learned the importance of teamwork. The other baggers and I had to work together to keep the lines moving and make sure everyone was happy. He continued, the best part about the job was the people I worked with. We were all teenagers, just trying to make a little money. We laughed a lot, we played pranks on each other, and we supported each other through thick and thin. It was like a little family. He recalled one particularly funny incident. One day, the store manager asked me to clean up a spill in aisle 5. It was a huge mess of grape jelly. I slipped and fell right into it, covering myself from head to toe in sticky, purple goo. The other employees couldn't stop laughing. It was mortifying at the time, but looking back, it's one of my fondest memories. Grandpa Joe smiled. My first job wasn't easy, but it was a valuable experience. It taught me the importance of hard work, responsibility, and teamwork. And it gave me some great stories to tell my grandkids. He winked. Like the grape jelly incident. And speaking of that CD player, Grandpa Joe said, seamlessly transitioning, let me tell you about the art of saving up for something you really wanted. It wasn't as easy as asking your parents to buy it for you, you know. The grandkids nodded, accustomed to the relative ease with which they could acquire new gadgets and toys. Back then, Grandpa Joe explained, if you wanted something, you had to earn the money yourself. There were no credit cards for teenagers, and allowances weren't exactly overflowing with cash. He chuckled. I remember wanting that CD player so badly. All my friends had one, and I felt like I was missing out. But it cost a fortune, at least what felt like a fortune to a 16-year-old bagging groceries. It was probably around $200, and I was making minimum wage, which was something like $4.25 an hour. Lily's eyes widened. That's so little. It was, Grandpa Joe agreed. But it was enough to get me started. I made a budget. I figured out how much money I needed to save each week to reach my goal. And I stuck to it. I packed my own lunch instead of buying it at school. I cut back on going to the movies. And I even started doing extra chores around the house to earn a little extra cash. He described the feeling of accomplishment each week as he deposited a portion of his paycheck into his savings account. He kept a running tally of how much he had saved, and he would visit the store every few weeks just to admire the CD player from afar. It took me months, Grandpa Joe said, but I finally reached my goal. I remember the day I went to the store to buy it. I was so excited, I could barely contain myself. I handed over my hard-earned cash, and the CD player was mine. It was the best feeling in the world. He paused, reflecting on the memory. That CD player meant more to me than anything I've ever bought since. Because I knew how much effort I had put into earning it. It taught me the value of money, the importance of hard work, and the satisfaction of achieving a goal. It was a lesson that has stayed with me throughout my life. He smiled at his grandkids. So, next time you want something, try saving up for it yourself. You'll appreciate it a lot more. Now, let me tell you about something that had us all completely freaked out, Grandpa Joe said, lowering his voice conspiratorially. Something called Y2K. The grandkids exchanged confused glances. Y2K? Maya asked. What's that? Y2K, Grandpa Joe explained, stood for year 2000. And it was a major computer scare that had everyone convinced the world was going to end when the clock struck midnight on January 1, 2000. He elaborated. See, back in the olden days, computer programmers used only 2 digits to represent the year. So, 1999 was written as 99. The fear was that when the year changed to 2000, the computers would read it as 2000, and they would think it was 1900. And that would cause all sorts of problems. Tom frowned. What kind of problems? Everything. Grandpa Joe exclaimed dramatically. Planes would fall out of the sky, power grids would shut down, banks would lose all their money, and the world would descend into chaos. Lily's eyes widened in fear. Really? Well, Grandpa Joe admitted with a chuckle, that's what everyone thought was going to happen. The news was full of stories about the Y2K bug and how it was going to destroy civilization as we knew it. People were hoarding food, water, and generators. Some people even built underground bunkers. He recalled the frantic preparations he and his family made. We stocked up on canned goods, bottled water, and batteries. We even bought a hand crank radio, just in case the power went out. It was a crazy time. He described the anticipation and anxiety as New Year's Eve approached. We gathered around the TV to watch the ball drop in Times Square, waiting for the moment when the clock struck midnight. Everyone was holding their breath, expecting the worst. Then, midnight came and went. And, nothing happened, Grandpa Joe said with a grin. The computers didn't crash, the planes didn't fall out of the sky, and the world didn't end. It was a huge anticlimax. But it was also a huge relief. He shook his head, still amused by the memory. Y2K turned out to be a big nothing burger. But it was a reminder that technology can be unpredictable, and that sometimes, we worry about things that never actually happen. He smiled. It was a very silly scare. And speaking of things that defined the 90s, Grandpa Joe said, clapping his hands together, let's talk about the music. Oh, the music was amazing. The grandkids perked up. They knew that Grandpa Joe had a soft spot for 90s music. The 90s were a time of so many different genres, Grandpa Joe explained. We had grunge, pop, hip-hop, alternative rock, there was something for everyone. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if trying to recall all the different artists and songs. Grunge was huge. Bands like Nirvana, Pearl Jam, and Soundgarden were all over the radio. It was angsty, raw, and rebellious. It was the sound of a generation. He sang a few lines from Smells Like Teen Spirit, slightly off-key but with obvious enthusiasm. Lily giggled. That's kind of loud, Grandpa. It was supposed to be loud. Grandpa Joe insisted with a grin. That was the point. But we also had pop music. Artists like Britney Spears, the Backstreet Boys, and NSYNC were dominating the charts. It was catchy, fun, and perfect for dancing. He proceeded to do a brief, awkward impression of a boy band dance move, much to the amusement of his grandkids. Tom, a budding hip-hop fan, spoke up. What about hip-hop, Grandpa? Oh, hip-hop was huge too. Grandpa Joe exclaimed. Artists like Tupac, Biggie Smalls, and A Tribe Called Quest were changing the game. It was powerful, lyrical, and socially conscious. He described the feeling of listening to his favorite 90s songs on his Walkman, the excitement of discovering new artists on MTV, and the joy of going to concerts with his friends. Music was a big part of our lives back then, Grandpa Joe said. It was how we expressed ourselves, how we connected with each other, and how we made sense of the world. And those songs still bring back so many memories. He smiled. I can hear a song from the 90s, and suddenly I'm transported back to that time. I can remember exactly where I was, who I was with, and how I felt. It's like a time machine. He winked at his grandkids. So, if you ever want to know what the 90s were really like, just listen to the music. It'll tell you everything you need to know. But it wasn't all about technology, fashion, and music, Grandpa Joe said, softening his tone. It was also about the people we met and the friendships we made. Some of my closest friends are people I met in the 90s. The grandkids listened intently, sensing a heartfelt story coming. I remember meeting my best friend, David, in high school, Grandpa Joe began. We were both in the same English class, and we bonded over our shared love of books and bad jokes. We spent hours talking about everything and nothing. We'd go to the movies, play video games, and just hang out. He was always there for me, no matter what. He paused, a wistful look in his eyes. We stayed in touch after high school, even though we went to different colleges. We'd write letters, call each other on the phone, and visit each other whenever we could. It was harder to stay connected back then, without cell phones or social media, but we made it work. He continued, I remember when I was going through a tough time in college. I was feeling lost and confused, and I didn't know what to do. David drove all the way to my campus just to talk to me. He listened to me vent, offered me advice, and reminded me that I wasn't alone. It meant the world to me. Grandpa Joe then said, even now, after all these years, we're still best friends. We don't see each other as often as we used to, but we still talk on the phone and visit each other when we can. He's been a constant presence in my life, a source of support, and a true friend. Making friends in the 90s was different. You built deep connections through shared experiences and genuine interactions. Without the distractions of social media, you really got to know people for who they were. He smiled warmly. So, remember to cherish your friendships, kids. They're one of the most important things in life. And don't be afraid to make new friends, even if it seems hard. You never know who you might meet and how they might change your life. The friendships you make can last a lifetime. Even if they are from the wild 90s. Life wasn't always easy in the 90s, though, Grandpa Joe said, his tone turning more serious. We faced challenges, just like every generation does. And sometimes, it was tough. The grandkids nodded solemnly, sensing a more somber story coming. I remember when my dad lost his job, Grandpa Joe began. He had worked at the same factory for over 20 years, and suddenly, they were downsizing. It was a shock to our family. We relied on his income, and we didn't know what we were going to do. He paused, his voice tinged with sadness. It was a difficult time. We had to cut back on expenses. We couldn't afford to go on vacation, and we had to be careful about what we bought at the grocery store. My mom started working a second job to help make ends meet. It was stressful for everyone. He continued, I felt helpless. I wanted to do something to help, but I didn't know what. So, I started working more hours at the grocery store. I gave my parents all the money I earned. It wasn't much, but it helped. Grandpa Joe then added, but even though it was a difficult time, we got through it. We supported each other, we stayed positive, and we never gave up hope. My dad eventually found a new job, and things slowly started to get back to normal. It taught me a valuable lesson about resilience and the importance of family. We learned that we could overcome any challenge as long as we had each other. He added, the 90s weren't always sunshine and rainbows, but they taught me how to be strong and how to appreciate the things I had. It was a time of growth and learning, even when it was hard. He looked at his grandchildren and said, "Life will throw curveballs at you sometimes, but you have to learn to roll with the punches and keep moving forward. And always remember that you're not alone. You have your family and your friends to support you." Looking back, Grandpa Joe said, his voice filled with a gentle nostalgia, life felt simpler back then, in some ways. Even without all the technology you kids have today. The grandkids looked at him thoughtfully, considering his words. "We didn't have the internet at our fingertips, but we spent more time outside, playing games and exploring the neighborhood," Grandpa Joe explained. "We didn't have cell phones, but we talked to each other face to face and built stronger connections. We didn't have social media, but we wrote letters and kept journals, reflecting on our thoughts and feelings." He paused, a wistful smile on his face. "Things moved at a slower pace. We weren't constantly bombarded with information and distractions. We had more time to think, to dream, and to just be present in the moment. There was a certain peace and quiet that's hard to find in today's world." He continued, "We also had a greater sense of community. We knew our neighbors, we participated in local events, and we supported each other. We weren't as isolated as people are today. The world felt smaller, but in a good way." Grandpa Joe then added, "I'm not saying that the 90s were perfect. We had our problems, just like every generation does. But there was something special about that time. It was a time of transition, a time of growth, and a time of discovery. We were on the cusp of a new millennium, and anything felt possible." He also stated, "We learned to rely on ourselves and on each other. We were resourceful, creative, and resilient. We knew how to entertain ourselves without screens, how to communicate without texting, and how to connect without social media." He paused and smiled at his grandchildren. "Life was different, but it was good. It taught me a lot about myself, about the world, and about what really matters in life. I learned to appreciate the simple things, the importance of relationships, and the power of human connection. And those are lessons that I'll carry with me forever." He emphasized, it was a time to be alive. But most of all, Grandpa Joe said, his eyes twinkling with warmth, "I'm grateful for my experiences in the 90s. Both the good and the bad. They shaped me into the person I am today." The grandkid smiled, sensing that the story was coming to a close. "I learned so much about myself, about the world, and about what really matters in life," Grandpa Joe explained. "I learned the importance of hard work, responsibility, and perseverance. I learned the value of friendship, family, and community. And I learned to appreciate the simple things, the beauty of nature, and the power of human connection." He paused, his voice filled with emotion. The 90s weren't always easy, but they were real. They were authentic. They were a time of growth, discovery, and transformation. And I wouldn't trade them for anything. He continued, "I'm grateful for the opportunities one had, the challenges I overcame, and the people I met along the way. I'm grateful for the memories I made, the lessons I learned, and the love I shared. And I'm grateful for the person I became." Grandpa Joe then added, "The 90s were a unique and special time, and I feel lucky to have experienced them. They taught me to be resilient, to be grateful, and to be true to myself. And those are lessons that I hope to pass on to you, my grandkids." He emphasized, "So, remember to embrace your own experiences, whatever they may be. Learn from your mistakes, cherish your successes, and never give up on your dreams. Because life is a journey, and every step of the way is an opportunity to grow, to learn, and to become the best version of yourself. And always remember to be grateful for what you have." He smiled. Because life is a precious gift, and every moment is worth cherishing. He looked to his grandkids. "And I cherish all of you. And if I could leave you with one final thought," Grandpa Joe said, pausing for emphasis, "it would be this: be present. Be present in every moment, in every conversation, and in every experience." The grandkids looked at him with rapt attention, eager to hear his words of wisdom. "The 90s taught me the importance of being present," Grandpa Joe explained. We didn't have the constant distractions of technology, so we were able to focus on what was happening right in front of us. We were able to truly connect with the people around us, to appreciate the beauty of nature, and to savor the simple pleasures of life. He continued, in today's world, it's so easy to get caught up in your phones, your tablets, and your computers. You're constantly bombarded with information and notifications, and it's hard to focus on anything for more than a few minutes. But I urge you to resist that temptation. Grandpa Joe then said, put down your devices, look around you, and really see what's happening. Listen to the people you're with, engage in meaningful conversations, and appreciate the beauty of the world around you. Because life is happening right now, in this moment. And if you're not present, you're going to miss it. He added, the 90s may be gone, but the lessons I learned during that time are still relevant today. And one of the most important lessons is the importance of being present. So, remember to slow down, to breathe, and to appreciate the simple things. Because those are the things that really matter in the end. He smiled. Live in the moment. He emphasized, so, go out there and make the most of your own lives. Learn from your experiences, cherish your friendships, and never forget the importance of being present. And always remember that I love you all very much. I hope you can create your own special stories to tell your grandkids one day. He beams at them. Just remember my 90s stories. Grandpa Joe smiled warmly, his eyes crinkling at the corners. So, that's my story about the 90s. It was a wild, wonderful, and sometimes weird time. But it was my time, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. The grandkids grinned back at him, their faces glowing with appreciation. Every generation has its own unique experiences, its own challenges, and its own triumphs, Grandpa Joe continued. And it's important to remember that. Your generation is growing up in a very different world than I did. You have technology that I could only dream of, opportunities that I never had, and challenges that are unique to your time. He paused, considering his words carefully. But one thing remains the same, the importance of human connection. No matter how much technology advances, no matter how much the world changes, the need for friendship, family, and love will always be there. He continued, so, embrace your own generation, learn from your experiences, and create your own memories. And don't forget to listen to the stories of your parents, your grandparents, and your elders. Because they have wisdom to share, lessons to teach, and experiences to impart. Grandpa Joe then added, and who knows? Maybe one day, you'll be sitting in this very chair, telling your own grandkids about the olden days of the 2020s. And they'll be just as fascinated as you are now. He emphasized, but until then, remember to live in the moment, cherish your relationships, and be grateful for all that you have. Because life is a precious gift, and every moment is worth celebrating. And remember, every generation has something special to offer the world. He looked at his grandchildren. And I can't wait to see what you will bring. He leans back in his chair, satisfied. Now, who wants ice cream? Lily, Tom, and Maya looked at their grandpa with newfound appreciation. They had always loved hearing his stories, but this time, they had learned so much more than just facts about the past. They had gained a glimpse into his life, his values, and his heart. Thank you, Grandpa, Maya said, speaking for all of them. That was a really great story. Yeah, Tom chimed in. I never knew life was so different back then. And the clothes. Lily exclaimed, giggling. Those were so funny. Grandpa Joe chuckled, his heart swelling with love for his grandkids. I'm glad you enjoyed it, he said. But remember, my stories are just one small piece of the puzzle. Every generation has its own story to tell, its own unique perspective on the world. He leaned forward, his eyes twinkling mischievously. So, why don't you ask your parents about their olden days? They grew up in the 2000s, which is ancient history compared to you. I'm sure they have some interesting stories to share. The grandkids exchanged excited glances. They had never really thought about asking their parents about their childhoods before. But now, they were eager to learn more. "That's a great idea, Grandpa," Maya said. "We'll ask them tonight." "Good," Grandpa Joe said, smiling. "Because family stories are important. They connect us to our past, they help us understand our present, and they give us hope for our future. And who knows? Maybe one day, you'll be the ones telling these stories to your own grandkids." He stretched, a contented sigh escaping his lips. "Now," he said, "about that ice cream." The grandkids cheered, jumping up from their seats and following Grandpa Joe into the kitchen, their heads filled with stories of the past and dreams of the future. The late afternoon sun continued to stream through the living room window, casting a warm, golden glow on the empty armchair, a silent witness to the power of storytelling and the enduring bonds of family. The 90s were over, but the lessons and the memories would live on, passed down from one generation to the next.